product with the Tom's model, vision seemed the most obvious choice.
There are 165 million people in the world who have visual impairment. 1% of the population is blind.
When we started this project, we knew nothing about saving or restoring vision. All we knew is that there was a great need.
With Tom's, we always work with local nonprofits and NGOs to understand really what the need is in a community before we just go in and start giving.
There is no reason for people to be unnecessarily blind. Majority of blinding conditions in the developing countries are either preventable or curable, like 80%.
I think what's really important to understand is just how powerful it is to help give sight to someone in need. With Tom's Eyewear, we are able to give someone the opportunity to wear a pair of shades knowing that there's a much greater purpose.
Please welcome
Here we go. Go ahead.
Blake Mycoskie.
Thank you. Wow, this is a lot of women in one room. Okay, so 7 years ago, I was doing something completely different with my life. I was running an online driver's education company. Now I know that's a little bit of an oxymoron, but I actually convinced the state of California that we could teach teenagers to drive online as well as in the classroom. That was the good news. The bad news is once we got this approved, all these other software competitors started competing with my company to launch our program. And I found myself working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. And by the time we finally launched, I was exhausted. So I decided to take some time off, and actually a full month, to unplug and recharge. I decided to go down to Argentina. Now, there's a little bit of a backstory of why I chose Argentina. About 3 years before that, my sister and I had been on this reality TV show called The Amazing Race. How many people have seen that show? Raise your hand. Wow, okay, lots of people. How many people saw it when I was on it 11 years ago? A couple. So if you didn't, so basically it's a scavenger hunt around the world. You have a partner, my partner is my sister, and the winners get $1 million. And after racing around the world for 31 days with my sister Paige, we unfortunately lost the $1 million by 4 minutes. 31 days and 4 minutes. And the worst part about it was my fault. And you are especially going to appreciate this. I lived out the greatest cliche in the world for men, and that is, I refuse to stop and ask for directions. And because of that, it's funny, my sister, about a month after the show, after we lost $1 million, she sent me a text message. And it was this random string of numbers, so I said, what's that? And I thought it was weird, so I was going to call her, and I thought, oh no, maybe she pocket dialed me with her phone. And then the next month, she sends me another text message, and it's another random string of numbers. So this time I call my sister and I say, Paige, what's with these text messages and these random string of numbers? And she said, Blake, those numbers are not random. That is the interest you owe me on my $500,000. I always ask for directions now. So I digress. So Argentina. So I went to Argentina because we'd been there on The Amazing Race. And on The Amazing Race, you don't really get to experience the full culture. So I wanted to immerse myself. So I took some tango lessons. I tried to play polo, but I kept falling off the horse. But I found one thing that I enjoyed and was pretty good at in Argentina, and that was this thing called the red wine, the Malbec. So I spent some time drinking red wine and visiting cafes on my vacation. And one of the last days of my trip, at one of the cafes, I met a couple women, 2 from the UK, 1 from the US, they were also in Argentina for a holiday, but instead of goofing around and doing what I was doing, they were actually doing volunteer work. Now, they were specifically doing something called a shoe drive. And what that meant was they were taking slightly used shoes from wealthy families in Buenos Aires and then giving them to children who desperately needed them living outside the city. Now, I grew up in a middle-class family in Texas and never had to worry about shoes or clothes or food or any of this. So I found it really surprising that there were kids just 2 hours outside of Buenos Aires that did not have the shoes they needed to go to school. So I'm a curious guy. I asked them a bunch of questions, and eventually one of the women said to me, she said, "Blake, if you want to come with us, we could use some extra hands in delivering the shoes." So there I found myself 2 days later going to a town, Los Pilitones, to help distribute shoes to about 250 kids that needed them. I could never have expected what I would feel. The joy was unbelievable. These kids were so excited to get a single pair of shoes, and these weren't even new shoes. It was unbelievable. And I did that afternoon with those women and a couple other volunteers. And I remember leaving and just those embraces from those kids and just feeling so filled. My spirit felt amazing. And I went back that night and I was talking to my buddy who's a professional polo player and was trying to teach me to play. And I said, "Alejo, this is what I did today." And I told him all about it and how these kids needed shoes for school and that we gave them to them and it was incredible and it was such a joy. And it was a really awesome conversation. And then he asked me a question that I wasn't really prepared for. He said, "Blake, if those kids need shoes so bad to go to school, and these women had spent the last 3 weeks collecting them to give to the kids, and they're going back to where they live, and you're going back here in a couple of days, who's going to give these kids their next pair of shoes? Because clearly they need them, and they're going to, as kids, they're going to grow out of them or wear out of them if it's their only pair." And the truth is, I hadn't stopped to think about that question. I was so caught up in the joy of giving and the experience that I hadn't stopped to think. And so I went to bed that night, and I can honestly say I didn't sleep very well, and I was a little troubled by this question because I was thinking, hold on, did I really do something good today? Or did I just further exasperate a problem and just push it down the field? And I didn't sleep well, and I woke up the next morning, and I don't know how you all, but if I ever have a good idea in the morning, it's always with a cup of coffee and kind of writing in my journal. And I was writing about this experience and this question, and then it hit me. I was thinking about how to get these kids more shoes, and I was just thinking about charity. But I didn't have any experience in charity. My parents and us did some volunteering when we were kids, but it wasn't like it was part of my life. But what I did have experience in is business. I started my first company when I was 18 years old, and I loved entrepreneurship. I loved using business to solve problems. So why couldn't business solve this problem of these kids needing shoes? So in my journal, I was writing, what if instead of starting a charity and being dependent on donations, we started a for-profit shoe company where every time we sold a pair, we would give a pair to one of these kids, one for one. Really simple. So everyone could understand it. And these kids could get the shoes that they need time after time. So as I'm writing this, old Alejo comes back to get me for breakfast, and without really thinking about it, I just kind of blurted out my idea. And he loved it. And not only did he love it, he said, "We have to do this. You can't go back to the United States yet. I know someone who knows someone who makes shoes. We can do this." And his enthusiasm, frankly, is what helped tip me over from just an idea to let's give it a shot. So I called my partners at the software company and said, "Sorry guys, I know I said I was taking a month off, but it's going to be a little bit longer. I had this idea." They weren't happy, but at the same time, they heard the passion in my voice. And so Alejo and I set out through Buenos Aires to meet with little artisan shoemakers, literally in their garages, to see if we could make these shoes that were very popular in Argentina, to come back and sell them in Venice, California, where I live, so I could come back at Christmas and give all these kids another new pair of shoes. Over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we eventually got to where we could make about 250 pairs of what originally became the first Toms. I put them in 3 duffel bags, and I gave Alejo a hug and headed to Los Angeles. Now, when I got back to LA, I had really 2 issues. The first was I had to get back to work. I'd been gone now for 7 weeks of a very fast-growing software startup that I was the chairman of, and my partners needed me to get back to work. And the second problem I had, probably a bigger problem, was I didn't really know anything about shoes. I mean, I got these guys to make us a few pairs, but I didn't know how much to charge for them, what stores to sell them in. who our target demo would be. None of these things were in my mind. But what I did know that every woman in my life, my mom, my sister, my girlfriend, they spent a ton of money and time on shoes. And so I decided to have this dinner party, only inviting all the women that I knew in my life. And when they got to my apartment in Venice, instead of having food on the table like you have right now, there were all these bright colored shoes. So they're looking at me like, what's this all about? And I explained to them that I was thinking of starting a shoe company with these shoes I found in Argentina. Now, I very specifically did not tell them the reason. I did not tell them that for every pair we sold, we were going to give one away. I wanted to see what the women in my life thought about these shoes as a shoe in itself. So it's pretty interesting if I'm sure you all have, watched each other trying on shoes. But for me, in my apartment in Venice, it was very interesting with like 9 women going around talking about these shoes. And I was hearing things like they're comfortable, they're cute. I would wear them with this outfit. They remind me of this shoe, which I love. So all this positive feedback, and then I pulled out the pictures of some of the kids that I had met in Los Piletones, and I explained what I was going to do with these shoes. And at that point, I've never seen women so excited to buy a pair of shoes. I mean, they all left with 2 or 3 pairs that they had purchased. They told me how much to charge for them, where to sell them, et cetera, and I was off to the races. So I'd work Monday through Friday at my software company, and on Saturday and Sunday I would go around to different retailers that these women told me to go to. And eventually I got in a great store in Hollywood called American Rag. The buyer agreed to buy 85 pairs of my inventory. Now I only had about 240 total, so this is a third of my inventory. But she said, Blake, the only way this is really going to work is I got to be able to tell your story. Your story is what is so interesting. I mean, the shoe is cool and it's great, but it's the story. So how are we going to do that? So I gave her this picture of me and one of the kids from the trip. And she put this picture up in the window of the store, and underneath it I wrote on a piece of cardboard, with every pair purchased, Tom's will give a new pair of shoes to a child in need, 1 for 1. So all the shoes are spread out. It's awesome. I'm excited. 1/3 of inventory is sold, and I go back to work. A few days later, I get a call from a woman named Booth Moore. Now, it turns out that Booth is the leading fashion writer of the LA Times. And she happened to be in the same store right after I left, and she heard the whole story and she thought it was amazing. She had never heard of a fashion company giving something away every time they sold it. And so she asked me the story. I told her the whole story, and she said, send me an email with a picture of your favorite pair, and I will get it into my next column. So I did. And I anxiously looked at the paper on the next Saturday morning, and unfortunately, nothing was there. I kind of forgot about it the next Saturday, but that Saturday, not just in her column, but on the cover of the LA Times calendar section, there were 2 headlines. The first headline at the very top was, Da Vinci Code opens with $300 million in box office sales. And the second headline was, Tom's shoes. Now get this. We sold 2,200 pairs of Toms on our website, on toms.com, before 2 o'clock that afternoon. But I only had 140 pairs in my apartment. So this is the first of many supply chain problems to come. 2,200 pairs. It was unbelievable. And the funny thing was, I had set our website to send me an email every time we got an order. And that was really cool at first, because it's like, oh, my mom ordered a pair, or my buddy from college, or my aunt. I mean, about 2 or 3 times a day I'd get an email, and I'd be like, have this positive affirmation that people were supporting what I was doing. But 2,200 was very problematic. I'll never forget, I turned my BlackBerry on that morning, 10 o'clock, Saturday morning, slept in, probably was out way too late the night before. Turn it on, and it just starts vibrating uncontrollably. And I don't know if you've ever had so many messages coming in that you can't even see the screen because there's so many. So I didn't know why it was doing this. So I put it on the table, and it just starts spinning like it's possessed. And it spins for 20 minutes, and then of course the battery dies. So I still don't know what's going on. And at this point, I didn't get the LA Times delivered to my house and kind of had forgotten about Booth more. And so I go to meet my buddies at this cafe where we always have brunch on the weekends in Venice. And as I walk in, one of my friends jumps out of the booth and he goes, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Can you believe it?" And I'm thinking, we eat here every Saturday. What's so exciting about this? And of course, he pulls it out and there I am, and then it all made sense. I didn't eat breakfast, I ran home, and I started to panic. I mean, what do? I don't know if Alejo and Jose can make any more shoes in their garages in Argentina. It took me 3 weeks to make 200 pairs, and we've already charged all these poor people's credit card. So I did what I think a lot of entrepreneurs do in a time of dire need, and I started putting as many ads for interns on Craigslist as possible. And that worked. I got some interns, and they agreed to call and email everyone, and I headed back to Argentina the next day. I literally went down to Argentina with a duffel bag full of clothes and one very important item, and that was this newspaper to prove that this was really happening. I landed in Buenos Aires. I took a taxi to Jose's house where the factory was in his garage. I walked in and I said, "Muchos zapatos rapido." And they couldn't believe it. But Jose called his uncle and someone called his friend, and before you know it, we had 8 artisan shoemakers all together and creating a little factory. And within a month, we were able to make 900 pairs a week. So we really were able to scale it up. And that was exciting because now I could actually send the shoes to all the people who paid for them a month before because of this article. So now I come back to LA, and this time instead of carrying duffel bags full of shoes, I got big boxes in the underbelly of the American Airlines cargo plane. And I arrive, and now it is July 2006. Now in July 2006, a movie came out called The Devil Wears Prada. Now in this audience, I'm guessing most of you have seen it, but just show me a set of hands. Okay, so you will really appreciate this. So I got back, and it's July 2006, and my girlfriend at the time says, "I want to go see this movie." I said, "Okay, great." And we go and see it, and I'm not kidding, the next week, I get a call from Anna Wintour's office at Vogue magazine. Now, I had just seen what this woman's character did to Anne Hathaway's character. I couldn't imagine what she was going to do to a guy from Texas who knows nothing about fashion. But I knew enough that in Vogue magazine calls, you go. So I got on a plane to New York, and thankfully I did, because then this came out. Now, hopefully everyone can see this slide. I know it's a big room, but I want to point out something that's pretty interesting here. Vogue magazine does something that, I mean, I guess it could be obvious, but what they did here is they made it look like I knew exactly what I was doing. I mean, this does not look like a guy who's selling shoes out of his apartment in Venice and that he has a guy in a garage making them in Argentina. I mean, it's Vogue. So not only did they make it look like I knew what I was doing, but the entire fashion industry believed I knew what I was doing. So all of a sudden, we started getting calls from Nordstrom's and Macy's and Urban Outfitters and Bloomingdale's and Barney's and stores in London and Paris, and not Paris, Texas, Paris, France. And I mean, it was incredible. And I'll never forget, about 2 weeks after this article came out, we had this policy, I guess you could call it a policy. We had this kind of agreement in my apartment where we were running the business, where it was just me and a few interns, that whoever was closest to our cordless phone, which was our business line, would answer the phone. And the reason that was the agreement was I don't know if you guys remember when we all had these cordless phones, and if they were off the charger for any amount of time, they would start beeping and it was super annoying. Well, we probably had the worst cordless phone in the history of cordless phones, because if it was off the charger for 90 seconds, it would start beeping. And it was our business line, so it was important. So we said, okay, whoever's closest, the phone has to always stay on the charger. So whoever's closest, you answer the phone. No customer service, anyone can do it. So I happen to be the closest when the phone rings 2 weeks after this article. I pick up the phone. I say, "Hi, this is Blake at Tom's." And there's this guy on the other line. And he's really anxious and a little bit agitated. And he says, yes, I need to order 100 pairs of women's Toms. I need red, I need navy, I need natural. I need them to go out today. Now I'm thinking, holy cow, this is the biggest single order we've ever had. and I have no idea who this is, but this is exciting, right? So I say, excuse me, sir, first off, who are you? Where are you calling from? And this is great. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm under a lot of pressure. My boss, she's putting a lot of pressure on me because I'm supposed to have these shoes on the floor and it's in vogue and this and that. And I'm thinking, okay, I know all that. I'm like, but where are you? He goes, oh yes, I'm calling from the corporate buying office of Nordstrom's in Seattle. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know a lot about shoes, but I know if Nordstrom calls, it's a big deal, especially if they're calling you in your apartment. And so I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And I say, but then of course I remember because of Vogue, we had sold out of all of our shoes again. It was just like the LA Times all over again. So I say, sir, I think this is awesome, but I really don't know if I can help you because we're sold out. So maybe in 5 or 6 weeks we can get some more shoes. And he says, no, you don't understand. This is Nordstrom calling, bump someone else's order. And I say, no, sir, I don't think you understand, with all due respect. Like, I would love to send you shoes, and I know who Nordstrom is, but I don't have any at all. I can't bump someone else's order. So at this point, the guy gets pissed off, and he says to me, listen, buddy, if you can't help me, put me in touch with your sales department. Now, let me just paint this picture for you. I'm standing in my apartment, cordless phone that's going to start beeping any second. I've got 3 interns eating breakfast tacos at my kitchen table, and this guy's yelling at me. So one of my interns, kind of overhearing the conversation, she starts going like this. I'm like, okay, sure, you deal with it. I toss her the phone. She catches it, and without a single bit of hesitation, she says, hi, this is Lena in sales. Now, I don't know if her voice was more soothing than mine, but she was able to talk the guy down. He agreed to take the shoes 6 weeks later, and today Nordstrom is still our biggest customer. So 10,000 pairs sold, blew our mind. We sold 10,000 pairs that summer out of my apartment. So we knew it was time to go back to Argentina and to hand place all these shoes on these kids' feet. The thing that we did not know about was how difficult it would be to do this in some orderly way, and we sure didn't know who was going to help. So I went to the people that I knew best, and that was my mom and my dad and my brother and all of our friends. And we went down there, and I could never have expected what I would experience. But being there with these kids, just 6 months after this was just an idea, and watching my mom not only put shoes on kids' feet, but literally taking the handy wipes out of her purse and cleaning these feet. And these feet were gross. Some of them had seen shoes, they had cuts, they had blisters, they had infections. And to see her do that the first day and care for those kids' feet as if they were my own or my sister's or my brother's just floored me. And in the first place, I'll never forget, I was just crying and crying and crying. And so much that I scared away all the kids that were with me. But it was so emotional, not just because it was my mom, but because the power of a single idea and what was happening because we acted on that idea. All of us in this room have amazing ideas every day, but think back of the ones that you don't act on, and if you did, what would happen? Before I close, I want to tell you about two more things that happened on that trip. It was the second week of that trip. We had distributed 8,000 pairs of shoes. We only had 2,000 left to go. We were leaving a clinic, and I was about to get in the van, and I had my box of shoes that were left over to go to the next group of kids. And as I'm about to get in the van, this woman comes running around the corner, and she's got 3 boys with her, and she's crying. And these boys all have brand new pairs of Toms on. And she's crying and crying, and she's shouting at me, and I'm saying, I don't understand you. You're speaking Spanish, I understand. So I ask Alejo, I say, Alejo, will you please ask this woman what's wrong? And he asked her, and when he asked her the question, she stopped crying and started smiling when she responded. But Alejo himself started crying. So before he even was able to tell me what she was saying. I knew she was not crying because she was sad, but she was happy. But I wasn't prepared for what Alejo was telling me. And that was this, that those 3 boys were this woman's kids, all 3 her sons. And for the past year, they had been sharing a single pair of shoes. And because of that, her oldest son would go to school on Monday, walk 3 hours to get there and 3 hours back, come back, give the shoes to his middle brother, and he would have to wait until Thursday to get the shoes to go back to school. Now, can you imagine, for those of you who have kids or brothers or sisters, that if the most important thing in these kids' life is their education, because that's what's going to help their alleviation from the poverty situation they're in, and they can only go to school every 3rd day because they didn't have a pair of shoes? When that woman told me that story, I vowed to commit my entire life and all my resources to building Toms. It just blew me away. I came back, I sold my software company. Thank you. Thank you. I sold my software company and I put everything into it, and we've been at it ever since. So I wish I could stay up here and talk for many more minutes or hours actually about what I've learned since then, but they're telling me on this monitor I got to wrap it up. So at least I can say thank you for letting me share this part of the story, and maybe next time I'll get to share the rest of it, but thank you very much.